Hey, what's up? It's Ms. D, and this is your video lecture on pastoral people. Now, as you know, the majority of the year has been and will continue to be focused on large scale urban, or urban civil. Hey, what's up? It's Ms. D, and this is your video lecture on pastoral people. Now, as you know, most of the year has been spent and will continue to be spent on large scale civilization, settled agricultural communities, right, that build large urban centers that have very complex social hierarchies, that have large scale building projects, walled cities and I'm going Hey, what's up? It's Ms. D, and this is your video lecture on pastoral people. All right, so look, the majority of the year has been and will continue to be spent on your typical agriculturally based societies, right? With large urban centers where these are settled communities and they'll have large building projects and so on and so forth. But there is still a sizable minority of people, even after the Neolithic Revolution, that do continue to be nomadic. And these are what we refer to as pastoral people. These people are able to survive in areas that are really very, very harsh climates that cannot support our agriculture. And the reason they are able to survive is because they depend on the domesticated animals that they maintain in herds. So they're able to live off the meat and the meat and the milk. Okay. Hey, what's up? This is Ms. D, and this is your video lecture on pastoral people. So, as you are aware, or should be aware, the majority of the year is going to be spent really focused on the typical large-scale settled agriculturally, communities, right? The types of civilizations that are dependent on staying put, using agriculture, growing their own food, and they're going to build these complex societies, right? With large-scale building projects, public works, whether it's irrigation or temple complexes, what have you. But you should be aware, even after the Neolithic Revolution, there is a sizable minority of people who continue to have a nomadic lifestyle. And we refer to these people as pastoralists. And the reason they're able to survive is because they maintain large herds of domesticated animals. And it is through these animals that they're able to get the meat, the milk, the wool, what have you, to survive and thrive. Now, since they are dependent on these animals, they must continue to move. These large herds of animals like that require a lot of grasses to eat, so a lot of grazing lands. Obviously, they also have to be aware of the seasons and, when the climate is inhospitable for the animals, they're going to continue to move, look for fresh water, what have you. All right, so how do pastoralists, well, first, let's look at where pastoralists are found. Generally speaking, pastoralists can be found in Eurasia, so Europe and Asia, as well as Africa. The one place you really won't find them is in the Americas. You may recall that in North and South America, the only large-scale animal that exists prior to the arrival of the Europeans is llamas and alpacas. And llamas and alpacas, although they do have wool and they are somewhat useful, you cannot milk them and you can't ride them. So you're not going to be capable of surviving as a pastoralist. Instead, really, the site of where we find the largest pastoral empires is the Eurasian steppes. Okay, so this is on like the border of modern day China, right? So that kind of western area of China. this is where you find, I mean, obviously the most well known is the Mongols, if anybody's ever heard of Genghis Khan. The Jianyu, which please don't make fun of me for how terribly I pronounce that. This is another group which you may not be as familiar with, but they're very important to Chinese society, and we're going to take a look at them in a future lesson. Also, the Huns are also really well known, especially for their role in the fall of the Roman Empire. So these guys, this is basically when you think of a pastoralist, when people kind of visualize it, these are generally the societies they think of. Very, very fierce, constantly on horseback, living in yurts, these, elaborate tents, and, maintaining large, large herds of sheep and goats and camels and, cattle. They do have some two-headed camels though, and so forth. Another area that you'll find pastoralists is in southwestern and central Asia. This is the Seljuk Turks, if you've ever heard of them. They're pretty infamous for their role in the Crusades. There's also the Ottomans. Now, the Ottoman Empire, when we talk about the Ottomans being pastoralists, please understand, we are talking about them in the very, very early days of the civilization when they were followers of Osman. And so they were very fierce, nomadic warriors and pastoralists. Later, though, they will conquer a lot of territory and they will change and become settled agricultural people. I mean, the Ottoman Empire is tremendous, very, very powerful. It rises in power in the Middle Ages and continues until World War I. So, and the Ottoman Empire is centered in Turkey. So it will change, but early on, it was a pastoral empire. The Arabian Sahara Deserts is another area where you can find pastoralists. If you know about the Bedouin Arabs, Berbers, these are groups of people who are really well known for their role in the camel caravans and enabling long distance trade throughout the Middle East. And these are people, they're associated with the one-humped camel. Sometimes they also maintain herds of sheep. The grasslands of sub-Saharan Africa, you can also find tribes of pastoral people. So the Maasai, the Fulbe. Another area you may not be aware of is subarctic Scandinavia, Russia, that kind of area. Very, very cold. And they don't rely on the horse. They rely on the reindeer. So, and there's also some Tibetan Plateau. They have the yak and so on. But what do all these people have in common? Generally speaking, if you're a pastoralist, you are going to live in a much smaller population. So that may sound familiar, right? When we talked about that pre-Neolithic revolution hunter-gatherers, those groups also were much smaller because they were constantly on the move. They have to also have enough room to, each member of these groups, and generally, as it says, it's kind of a clan or kinship based society. So whether they're tribal or clan, each member is going to maintain a very large herd of animals. And this requires just a huge amount of land for these animals to feed on. So you're not going to be able to keep up, you're not going to be able to maintain a large society. In addition, like it says, when it talks about clan and kinship based society, so basically, these are areas where there is kind of a distant relationship between, if not blood, then through marriage with a lot of the members of these groups. That's very common. Socially, again, seeing as these groups are so small, you're not going to see the very strict social hierarchies that you see in urban-based societies, right? Into these settled agricultural societies. It's much more even. You don't see those different levels, right? Generally it is more egalitarian. Now, obviously there is going to be differences, like it said. I mean, you're going to have rich members of the group versus, people who have smaller flocks who are poorer. They are going to take slaves, especially in warfare. They will enslave people who on the losing side. But when you have these kind of smaller groups, the members of the tribe generally all have valuable roles to play. There just isn't enough slack in the rope to let people, not be equally contributing members. Even women generally do have much higher status in these types of societies in comparison to, your typical agricultural societies. And the geographic impact, you should be aware that they are pretty harsh on the environment. One of the issues you're going to have is as these animals eat at the grass, eventually, if you continue to eat away at the grass, you'll eventually kill the grass. In addition, all of these animals just pounding on the dirt gets compacted. So if you've ever, let's say, if you're familiar with the baseball fields, if you've ever seen a baseball field that's played on grass, just constantly just beating on that grass, eventually it just stops growing. One of the issues you have with compacted soil is it just becomes so solid and so densely packed that there isn't room for water, for nutrients, and what have you to get through into the soil. So that's why, you guys are probably city kids, you wouldn't realize this, but that's why, if you ever know people who throw earthworms or they love earthworms, if they're very into gardening, that's because earthworms actually make holes in the soil and they keep it aerated. Anyway, so animals just do a number on the soil, compacting the soil. As I said, if they overgraze, those two things together cause what's called desertification. Now, you may not be familiar with that. Usually when we think of deserts, we think of the Sahara Desert or the Gobi Desert or something. And it's just part of the geography. It just has always been there. But in point of fact, human behavior can create deserts. If you're living, especially if you're in a hot, dry climate, if you kill off all the kind of living plant life, what ends up happening is the soil gets dried out and the roots that hold on to the soil die. And once you lose that roots, that topsoil gets blown away, and then you end up enlarging deserts, and you really destroy the environment. And as you can see as well, since they are maintaining their herds, they are going to want certain kinds of animals with certain kind of features. So yes, you will lose your biodiversity. All right, finally, one of the most important topics is how they got along with their agricultural neighbors. As you can imagine, you're not going to be able to live off of, yak meat and cattle and milk all the time. You are going to want a more varied diet. In addition, you definitely want manufactured goods, especially when it comes to really advanced weapons like swords and, later guns or what have you. But yes, they are absolutely going to be trading with the settled agricultural neighbors. They're very, very important. And they are, generally speaking, pastoralists. The exact role of pastoralists and how much of a role they play in trade, whether it's short distance or long distance trade, and their role in, let's say, the Silk Road and so on, it is something of great interest to historians. There's a little bit of debate going on about it now, but absolutely they did have an important role of trade, because think about it, these are people who are on the move. They naturally, for example, like I said, the Bedouins especially, and the Berbers are known for this, is since they're on the move and they are nomadic people, they are the perfect conduits to enable trade. And they see it as a very positive thing because, like I said, they want to be able to trade and get their hands on goods that these settled agricultural communities make. And they will either get this wealth from trade or very often through warfare by doing raids. And nomadic people, these nomadic pastoral people, are infamous for being just the fiercest warriors. If you think about the lifestyle of constantly being on the move, constantly on horseback, constantly using chariots, it is and they're living in very, very rough climates, right? These very inhospitable climates that tends to make people much, much fiercer, because otherwise you're just not going to survive. So, and then you take that, in addition to that, when these guys go to war and they battle, it's all hands on deck. Everyone is expected. These are warrior societies, right? Because they don't have the excess population and the excess wealth to allow somebody to be a professional soldier. Everyone is a soldier. You're constantly doing everything. So all members of the clan, of the tribe, or what have you, are warriors. And as you can see, there were it was very common for there to be a lot of rivalries between the different clans, between the different groups within these larger communities. And so if you're in that state of constant warfare, it's very, really, they are constantly building these fierce battle skills. And Genghis Khan in particular was just really famous for just having a phenomenally strategic mind as far as how to plan warfare and so on. And then cultural diffusion. Again, trade just in and of itself, it allows different cultures to have contact with each other, share ideas, share knowledge, what have you, through that contact. And so the contact that these nomadic people have by contacting and being in large, contact with many different societies across large areas. Obviously, this is going to enable cultural diffusion, where you're going to see ideas and knowledge spread throughout the world. So they were certainly an important element in enabling that kind of cultural diffusion. So you can see iron-based technologies. Obviously, a lot of these groups were based on, as you can see, either on camelback or on horseback to be able to move. So technologies like the stirrup, that's that little triangle metal thing that you put your foot into when you go to ride a horse. The bridle, which allows you to control the animal. Chariots to ride in. This is something they're going to use. That as they move to different areas, the new people will be exposed to these technologies. And then languages, the Indo-European language, if you remember our discussion about India, about the Aryan people within that Indo-European area where they were moving all over. I don't know if you remember the map that I showed you in class where these people moved all over. Those languages, they were able to spread to all these different areas because you have nomadic people. You had people who are on the move. Bantu also is a language family found in Africa. And basically, if you go into all sub-Saharan Africa, a lot of the languages there have Bantu as their base language. All right, with that, we are all done. I thank you so much for listening, and I will see you in class.